Storytelling is an art. It is an incredibly valuable tool to add to your proverbial marketing tool belt and the way your audience responds and engages. Stories bring people together and inspire action and response. Also, today's consumer doesn't decide to buy based on what you're selling, but rather why you're selling it. Tune in as Dan Manning shares how telling stories is an effective marketing strategy and discover how buyers become interested in your products through storytelling.
I want to welcome you to the Dominate Your Market podcast, where we interview leaders, CEOs, founders, and high-impact business development professionals to get their insights on how you can grow your business efficiently, build an amazing company, and still have a life. Today's guest is Dan Manning. Dan is the founder and chief story architect at buildthestory.com, where he helps founders, coaches, and consultants build 3-minute stories that sell. Hey, Dan, I like the phrase on your LinkedIn that you say, I help you build business stories that hold attention long enough to get to yes. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Mike. I'm really glad to be here.
That phrase was awesome. I just pulled that out just in the last couple of minutes. I pulled up your LinkedIn and I thought, ooh, I like that. That's very, very good. But hey, for our listeners, give a little background on yourself and kind of how you got to where you're at now.
Yeah. So I have a pretty winding place or a winding story to get where I am. But in the short version, I spent a career as a fighter pilot in the Air Force. The first half of the time I was in the Air Force, I was a fighter pilot. The second half, I was a military diplomat. I was a Russian speaker. I lived in Central Asia. I did a lot of negotiations with the Russians in Syria near the end of my career. But as I was wrapping up my time in the Air Force and trying to decide, like, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? A lot of my friends are going to the airlines, but it just wasn't interesting to me. Other friends were going to work in defense, but that wasn't something that I wanted to do. I had no interest in going back and just continuing to do kind of the same stuff I had been doing. So I said, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? And what I wanted to do is help to create impact, help other people to be able to create impact in their own lives or through their own businesses or whatever it was that they were choosing to devote themselves and their lives to doing. So I started teaching these basic human skills, things like critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, and communication. And as I continued to teach, I kept gravitating more and more towards the communication part. How do I communicate ideas from my brain into yours? And story is the way to do that. So over the past year or so, I've really doubled down on storytelling and how to be an effective communicator using stories. And that's primarily what I'm doing now for founders, for coaches, for consultants, and for some marketing agencies as well.
Well, first and foremost, thank you for your service.
Oh, thank you.
Come on. That's impressive. I mean, what an amazing transition though, from fighter pilot to sort of marketer / just, wow, that's a really interesting move.
Well, I mean, so the fighter pilot community tells a lot of stories. I mean, one of the things that we would say is that you will never live long enough to make all the mistakes yourself. You have to learn from the mistakes of others. And the way that you learn from the mistakes of others is through storytelling. So on any fighter squadron, especially on a Friday evening, the squadron bar is going to be packed and people are going to be telling stories, right? Whether you drink or you don't drink, whatever's going on, like the storytelling is a major part of your development as a fighter pilot. You go there, you share stories about what happened, what worked, what didn't work. If you have some older, more experienced people come in, they'll tell their stories from Vietnam or from long ago, and you're still learning and you're adding that experience, their experience, to yours. And you're able to put those together in a way that no other species on the planet does that. Humans do it. We tell stories because that's how we learn and how we communicate.
That's interesting because you really kind of check a skill set that was developed as a fighter pilot that I think a lot of people wouldn't see just on the surface. This storytelling, you'd be like, fighter pilot storytelling, what is that all about? But now that you explain it, that's really cool that you extracted that and thought, okay, I want to make a business out of that. And I think what you're doing is really helpful for any business out there. And I'm not saying it just because you're on the podcast, but storytelling, because like you said, human beings love stories, and they love to interject themselves in the story, right? A lot of the time, they want to be the heroes a fair bit of the time.
Yeah,
so I think all those components of storytelling turned into like a business is incredible.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. I mean, humans humans have told stories as long as there have been humans. If you think back to even like cave art, like those pictures aren't just pictures that are drawn up there just for doodles, right? I imagine that those are actually pictures that somebody was telling about the hunt. And it's not just to entertain people about, oh, we had a great hunt, and here's what happened. But every time that they are telling those stories, the people that they are telling the story to learn something about hunting. They learn something about the way that the animals behave. They learn something about how to make those weapons. They learn something about how to survive, right? So it's kind of almost a cliche to say that we're wired for story, but it's 100% true. As humans, we are designed to learn from other humans, and the way we do that most effectively, most reliably, is through storytelling.
You know what's interesting is, even as when I talk to a potential consulting client, I can tell you for sure, unequivocally, that 90% of the time that they go with me and say, yeah, let's do it, I've presented a story of a previous client.
Oh, yeah.
90% of the time, like where I say something that's very relevant to them. And it's a true story, by the way. And we had this client that we did this, started here, went there. And they're like, wait a minute, really? And I'm like, yeah. And they go, well, shoot, let's go. So that's that power of story is, and and when I think of socially, it's funny. My now ex-wife, and it's all good. But she knows who I am, and she's like, man, you are this intense guy. And I come across fairly introverted most of the time. I'm not the guy that walks into a party and wants to walk in the center of the room and look at me.
Sure.
I am that, but if you get me going, oh boy. And it's story after story after story. And my ex used to always say, holy crap, I didn't know if you were ever going to stop. So that goes back to what you're saying. It's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about, like, as a consultant in particular, like when you're talking to a client and you tell the story of someone else, I talk about these when I build stories as like a customer success story. I'm telling you the story of how I helped another customer to achieve success. And if I build that story correctly, as I tell that story, you're not just hearing the words that I'm saying. Like, your brain is actively simulating that story in your own head, except you're making an important change. You are putting yourself as the main character in that story. So I want to tell a story that has enough details that kind of keeps you on the tracks, but not so many details that I force you to see it only from my perspective. I want you to use your own experience. And I want to be able to tell a story about somebody who is experiencing problems that you are also experiencing. Maybe you're having problems finding clients, or maybe you're having problems closing those clients, and things seem to go pretty good. And you talk to them, you talk to the client, and they say, let me think about it. And they never get back to you. Right? That's something that's universal. People can sort of understand that. And when I tell you that story, like even right now, you can't help but imagine yourself in that same place.
Yep.
But then when I say, but then we did this thing, we made this change, we started doing these other things, and now they close 80% of their clients. Nobody says anymore that they're going to get back to you. We work so that they can close them right now.
Yep.
And the great thing is that you get to experience that same relief and that same joy. And anytime you're selling anything, if the person you're talking to is imagining themselves using your product or using your service, you're winning.
Well, you know what's interesting is when I came across you on LinkedIn, I thought he is going to be in my podcast for sure. Awesome. Yeah, just because before I even met you, every client I work with, typically CEOs, founders, or business owners, right? One of the first questions I ask them almost before they hire me is, what's your story? Give me your business story, right? And truly I do. And I've done it for years. And they go, well, I bought the company because of this. And I said, really? And I said, here's what I used to say to them. That's a video. I said, that's a video. What you just said is video. And they're like, well, I don't want to shoot a video. So now I'm getting strategic, and I'll get them on a Zoom call and get them talking. And I'm like, ooh, this could be a video because I'm recording it.
Sure.
And they're super comfortable because we're chatting. And then once I get them comfortable, I bring them into well, tell me your story with the business, the founding story, why you bought the business. And they do. It's so powerful. It's just crazy.
I mean, the way that you asked that question the last time there, like, why did you do this? Right? When we ask the question why, the answer we want is a story. If you think about, especially after some tragedy, for instance, like, why did that person go and do that thing? Like, maybe it was a shooting or something somewhere. Everyone's like, why? Like, why did that person decide to do that thing? And the answer that we crave is something that will use the past to explain the present. So when you start asking that why question, and if you're a business owner and you ask, like, why did you buy this company? You can't just say, well, it was a good price. Like that's never the thing, right? It's, well, I wanted to do this thing. I've been trying to do this for a while. There was this great opportunity, and I said, you know what, I'll give it a try. And now you start linking those things together in a way that is very specific, but it also is teaching some lesson along the way, right? Maybe it's teaching me a lesson about opportunity. Maybe it's teaching me a lesson about resilience, or whatever that lesson is. But I'm selfish. I want to not just listen to a story for entertainment, maybe in a movie or in a TV show, but if I'm listening to a business story, or most stories in my life, I want to find, what lesson are you conveying that I can add to my own experience to be able to make me more resilient, to be a better performer, to do better in my own life.
Well, you just said something critical. So listeners out there, ask the why question.
Yeah.
Ask the why question. That is huge. And I think, well, I don't know if anybody, salespeople, whoever they are, I don't know. I would hope that you've been around the block enough to be able to ask that question. I mean, it's pretty common sense to be like, well, why did you start the business? Or why do you have the business? Or, a lot of times I'll even say, why do you have it now? Like, what's the end goal? And then I start getting into that. And that's not really the story part of it, but that just extends off of that.
Well,
right.
But I think it is closely related. So not only are you asking your client the why question, but you're asking yourself that question as well. Like, why do I believe this thing? Why do I invest myself into this business? Why am I passionate about this? And not just, well, because I think it's good, but try to really go back and really think about that moment of transformation in your own life. Every story worth hearing, every story worth telling is a story of change, is a story of transformation. So you got to dig into yourself, unless you're working with somebody who's helping you to tell a story, but you got to dig into yourself to figure out, like, why am I this way? Why have I decided to do this thing? Because there's some point, sometimes it's hard to find, sometimes it's pretty obvious, but there's some point that divides your life between the way you used to do things and the way you do things now. And the closer you can get to being specific about that point, the more compelling your story is. And the more people want to hear why. Why did you do that? And what lesson can I take from it?
That is so freaking powerful. I don't know what to say, because when I wrote that yellow book right over there, that's doing very well, and I'm having so much. It was cathartic, because a lot of writers will say that one of the biggest takeaways from finishing their book was how cathartic it felt. They dumped, for me, I dumped 25 years of my experiences in business, personal, and all of that in one book.
Yeah.
But one thing it did for me was, I'm big into health and fitness, right? I was a private fitness trainer for 20 years. And who did I train back then? CEOs. So it's full circle, right?
Yeah.
And so it made me realize that there's a lot of CEOs out there that are physically in bad shape, right?
Sure.
And when you're physically in bad shape, that goes over into your mental. And when it goes over into your mental, that goes into your performance. It's just that domino effect.
Right.
And that's a story I've not told on LinkedIn yet, which I'm going to now.
Yes.
Because it really makes me think, I wrote this book for CEOs and mostly men, because that's who I've worked with my entire career is men.
Yeah.
Because these men are under a lot of stress, and not that women aren't, but I've worked with men. So it is what it is.
Yeah.
But I've never really, outside of, if somebody reads the book, they'll see the story. If they don't read the book, I should probably tell the story in public if they don't, in case they don't read the book. Right.
So, I mean, I would encourage you to think back to, like, did you set out wanting to work with CEOs, or did you just had a business helping people?
It was strategic. Okay. When I was a trainer way back in the day, I had a choice of going to a gym,
right,
and giving 50% of the money away to the gym, and making nothing, or I had an opportunity to work with multimillionaires in their home. Pretty easy decision which one I wanted to do.
Yeah. So then I would encourage you to think back to maybe one of those clients and the transformation that you helped. You said you worked mostly with men, that you helped him to make. And you get really specific on when either you realized the transformation in him or he realized the transformation in himself. And you tell the story about that place. where things went from the way they used to be to this new way.
Yep.
And when you tell the story around that, people are like, we can't help but listen, right? It's dopamine that actually, you build the story the right way. It's dopamine that's actually pulling us along. Dopamine is the seeking chemical. We're looking for this answer, this prize, this treasure at the end of the road. And when you build a story the right way, it's just pulling you along step by step, and your readers will eat it up. And along the way, they're taking in the lessons that you're trying to convey by telling the story as well.
Yeah, I think that's gold, what you just said. And I think a lot of people, if they can feel like they can relate to it, if they truly can, because a lot of times, I'll give you a good example, even in marketing. So, you get a business owner, and let's say they do beauty products, right? And they do, let's say, a print ad. Nobody does these anymore, but I've consulted with so many clients that do this. They'll do a magazine ad, and it's of this drop dead gorgeous woman who's a model. And I asked them, do any of your potential clients look like that? And they're like, no. And I said, well, then why would you put that picture full blown on the ad? Right. Actually, probably 60% of the ad is the picture of the woman. Why would you put that picture up? And they're like, well, nobody's ever told me different. And I said, you want to be relatable. Yes, you can have an attractive person. Don't have a drop dead gorgeous model, because everybody's gonna have a disconnect. They're not gonna relate to it. They're gonna have a disconnect like, well, that's not me. And that's, these are the kind of things that psychologically, when you think of your end consumer, don't do that. And the story, same thing. If the story is relatable to your ideal market, then they can interject themselves right in. Would you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. And the place where business owners and founders often go wrong is they will tell a story about themselves. And it's okay in a certain context, but your story, if you tell the story about how you personally decided that you wanted to do this thing because it was the thing that you were driven to do, that is only going to be a relatable story if your potential customers can see themselves in it, right? So if you are if you have a very technical business, for instance, right? If you're interested in the blockchain, and you talk about how you discovered blockchain and how you figured out how it works, and it was something that's really interesting to you, so you started selling NFTs or cryptocurrency or whatever. Like, that's a mildly interesting story, but I can't see myself in it because I'm not a blockchain expert, for instance. But instead, I start working to sort of zoom out the story. I need to find this universal transformation. So it could be that I tell a story about how I used to be confused, and I went from confusion to knowledge, or I went from fear to confidence. And now once you start getting to those more universal themes, everybody can relate to those. And I'm telling a story about that transformation, and it happens to be as I discovered how to use blockchain. But I've got to zoom out so that people can see themselves in that story, and then give them enough details so that they can sort of put themselves in that place. And now they can experience that transformation along with me as I tell the story.
I totally dig this stuff. This stuff is so fascinating to me because it does go back to consumer psychology, right? It does. Plays right into that, right?
It's just human psychology. Yeah.
Right. Human, right? So when you, like you said, when like a business owner, CEO, or founder is telling their story, part of what I do too is I say, make the story to the benefit of the viewer, right? Tell your story, but also put the solution in there. Like, like where, well, I bought this company because there was nothing like this in the market before. And I was I've got a client right now, phenomenal client. He bought a company because he was in a position previously that he would have dreamed to have the accessibility of this particular company.
Sure.
Then he bought that company.
Oh, wow.
And I said, wow, what a story. And so again, if you turn that back around into the solution and benefit of it, you have this now. I didn't have it. I bought the company. You have this now, right?
Yes. Yeah. Or the other way it happens. My wife has a fresh roasted coffee business, and she'll talk to her customers about coffee. And every now and then people will ask, like, maybe they've never had fresh roasted coffee. So she'll tell this really short story about when we were living in Kyrgyzstan in Central Asia. We had some friends who opened up a chain of coffee restaurants that were there, and we were in their roast house, which was just a barn behind their house, and they had just roasted some coffee, and they made a French press for us, and we drank it, and the flavors were like nothing we'd ever tasted in coffee before. That one cup of coffee like literally changed my wife's life, and she went from drinking old stale coffee to now drinking this fresh roasted coffee. So for everybody that's hearing that story, like they're wondering, like, could that change my life? Could it really be that good? Is it something that's really going to work for me? And it is, by the way. This fresh roasted coffee is definitely
awesome.
The way to go. But you put the people that are hearing the story, you have to tell it in a way that they can put themselves in it, they can experience it, they get to experience the transformation, and all along the way, you're conveying your lessons and your value as well.
Well, and I think with the story with your wife, there's some taste buds involved here. Like you can almost like mentally go, ooh, like you could, I mean, if the story's done right, even,
yes,
you can smell it.
Oh, like 100%.
Your sensory receptions can be like, I think I can kind of smell that right now, even though they can't.
Yeah.
Well, you want to talk about interjecting yourself right in that story and going, ooh, I want that cup of coffee.
Yes. So our brains are not the best at separating what we imagine from reality. Like if you've ever, in the middle of the day, you think back, did I dream that thing, or is that something that actually happened? Right. And our brains are not the best at separating those. In some of the workshops that I do, I'll ask somebody to describe, like, what does it feel like that moment when you're on a roller coaster and it's going up the hill? It hasn't gone over the top yet. It's just getting right to the very top. You can start to see the ground getting smaller beneath you. You start hearing that click, 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 click as you get closer and closer to the top. And you just start to see that first car go over. You hear the first screams coming towards you. You see those first hands come up. And even now, when I tell it, like my heart starts beating faster.
Oh boy, like, mine too. I'm kind of thinking.
So I know I'm not on a roller coaster. It's 100% true that I'm here and I'm talking to you. But my brain, the whole time I'm telling that, the parts of my brain that are related to my visual cortex or my auditory cortex or those feelings, those are lighting off. And there's some great studies that were done using these functional MRI machines. So they could go and they could study the way that blood is flowing in a person's brain. So they put a person into an MRI and had them tell a story, like spontaneously tell a story, not read a story, but just tell something. They recorded it. And they recorded the way that, I think it was a female subject, they recorded the way that her brain was lighting up. And then later they bring other people and they put them into the MRI and they play back the recording of her telling that story. And their brains lit up the same way. The researchers, the neuroscientists called it this neural coupling, that the storyteller and the story audience, that their brains, if the story is allowed to rise and burn in the living immediacy, was the quote that they used, their brains actually become like coupled. The way that my brain lights up becomes the same way that your brain lights up. And I'm able to create these sensations inside your brain that makes you feel like you have had these same experiences that I'm sharing. And that's why we're able to learn from stories so well, because you're not just hearing like a list of features about our product. You are envisioning them, they become a part of you, they're active in your brain, and it just sticks so much better than a raw list of facts.
I can't imagine every business on the planet should be implementing stories, right?
Yes,
I mean,
I agree. Yeah.
No, really. I mean, and you'd have to have probably a company of 100 employees to cover all that. But truly, I mean, yeah. Well, these stories are incredible. But hey, tell me this, and I love this.
Yeah.
Why 3-minute stories? Because I kind of know the answer, sort of, but I want to hear it all from you.
Yeah. So in a 3-minute story, 3 minutes is it's a perfect length of time. If somebody says, well, tell me what you do, right? In 3 minutes, I can go through and I can deliver a compact, tight, but well-structured story about what it is I do and why I do it. 3 minutes turns out to be somewhere between 500 and 600 words. Also, we become habituated to things happening in sort of about that 3-minute time frame by movies, for instance. When you're watching a movie, you see a scene in a movie, something plays out, the scene changes and goes to something else. It turns out that's about an average of 3 minutes. I can hold anyone's attention for 3 minutes with a well-constructed story. You're not going to be too distracted. You're not going to be wanting to check your email. You're not going to want to be seeing what else is going on. I can hold your attention long enough to convey what I'm saying. But also from the storyteller's perspective, 3 minutes forces me to get to the point. I can't just ramble on. I got to know what it is I want to say. What's the point that I'm trying to make? What's the change that's happening in the story? Deliver it, tell them what I meant, why I told them the story, and then move on.
But you know what's interesting? Even at 3 minutes, if you craft a story like I'm sure you do with all of your clients, that hooks them and engages them early on, then you can go all the way through, and people are very attentive.
Oh, yeah.
Right? You know, yes. But I think if it's a story, which I'm sure you do not do this, the other side of it would be self-serving, boring. You know, maybe like you said, if it's a business story, feature, mm-hmm. you know, I always say that the biggest no word in business is the word we, because it connotates you're talking about yourself. So you know, yeah. I've done analysis on company websites of how often the word we is.
Yeah.
And it's like a Christmas tree. Every page is lit up like a Christmas tree, right? And when you look at that, the content is written all about you, the company. It's not written for the visitor. It's not written, you know, so I always say, take every we that you write and change it to you or your. So there's a good exercise for people, like on a website.
Yeah, sure.
We, all the way through.
Yeah.
Well, how about change that to you or your, and that's going to take a little bit of work to make it grammatically correct.
Sure.
But I think it goes on along with what you're saying in the stories.
Yeah, I mean, so the advice you're giving is very common advice, right? If you look at books like Story Brand from Donald Miller, he talks about, you know, making it all about your customer, and that, I mean, it's not bad advice. And we in particular, like getting rid of we, 100%, I agree with that, because it's hard for me to imagine in my brain a we, right? I can imagine a you, like I can imagine Mike, I can imagine Dan, I can imagine Sarah, but I can't imagine like a collective. I don't know what it's like to recreate those images inside my brain. So it gives me this extra distance from that. But if I tell a story that you can relate to, it almost doesn't matter whether it is an I story or, in fact, if I tell an I story, I'm giving you the opening for you to be able to make those imaginations, right? If I tell a story about you, it didn't actually happen to you. So there's this conflict inside your own brain about, well, that's not right. It's hard for us sometimes to break through those things. But if I'm telling you about something that happened to me, the way that you evaluate that story is by the entirety of the story. You're not evaluating each sentence as I send it out. You're evaluating it as a whole thing. And really what you're evaluating is, like, does it make sense? Did Dan act in the way that I would expect Dan to act? Is it internally coherent? And then what's the lesson that comes from that? So I think you're giving good advice, and certainly good advice about ensuring that you are thoughtful about the perspective you're taking and knowing that your audience is selfish. So make sure that you're giving them something that speaks to them.
No, I think that's awesome. You know, it's funny because when you say that, people do need to be able to interject themselves in it. And I think there, you know, the BS, what's that called? The BS meter is very high nowadays, right? You know, it's like, you know, so if somebody tells a story and you see it, you know, God forbid, I'm a marketing professional / consultant, but you see it with marketers all over the place, right? Where they're telling a story, maybe it's a client result, and it really sounds just off the charts outlandish. Like, oh, this one client came on and they're making 7 figures in 30 days. And you go, wait a minute, that doesn't sound real. So I would imagine, and tell me if I'm wrong on this one, but I would imagine if the stories that you're crafting, number one, they've got to be authentic and real. Obviously, I don't think you're going to help any client do a non-real story, but there's a point where I think a lot of people are abusing stories by making them up. They're false, they're untrue, and they're not even realistic. They're crazy. And even if they are realistic, I would probably tell that marketer, yeah, don't use that one because that really doesn't sound realistic. Like, you know, even if it's a real story, unless you can craft it with your skill set, then maybe you can turn that into magic, right?
Right. So like the way that you started out, you know, this piece of the conversation was, you know, I worked with this client and they were able to make, you know, 7 figures on this deal, right? A lot of times people they think that they're telling a story, but that's not a story, right? That is a fact. That is just a a single fact that you're offering up to me. And like I was talking about a minute ago, for each time that I hear a fact, I critically evaluate that fact like one statement at a time.
Ooh,
right?
wow.
So I'm seeing, like, is it possible that somebody could have done this one change and then made 7 figures? Well, maybe if they started out their business close to 7 figures, maybe that would be enough. But meanwhile, I'm thinking through all of those things and I haven't heard anything else that you've said because I'm critically evaluating that. But if I say, listen, let me tell you about this business I was working with the other day. They're in a business that's very similar to yours. They're a consultant. I worked with them. They had a really hard time communicating their ideas and people just didn't get what it was they did, but we worked together. We built them a story. And then the first time that he told that story, not only did people understand what it was he was doing, but they gave him his biggest check ever. Stories work. And if you work with me, I'm going to be able to build a story for you that will sell. Now, when you evaluate that, you don't evaluate each sentence that I said. You take a look at that entire thing. And now you're saying, one, you've learned a little bit about me and about the way that I work. Do you trust me? I listened to your other podcast about trust yesterday as well.
Phenomenal. Yeah.
So you're evaluating, do you trust me? And does it make sense inside that story that a person would have been able to make those changes? And if so, then all right, well, that's something that you imagined yourself experiencing as well. And you're that much closer to saying, all right, let me give it a try for real myself now.
It's interesting when you say like a fact, like, and how you get focused on it to where you're not hearing anything else.
Yeah.
That right there for like the listeners, anybody thinking of a story, boy, there you go right there. Like the story you just said.
Yeah.
My brain didn't stop at all. Right.
No.
There was no stopping and analyzing. It was, you were talking. I'm like, whoop, 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 whoop,
yeah.
Done. Like there, it was just seamless.
Because yes, no, you're exactly right, Mike, because that's the way that our brains are designed. Our brains are designed to learn from other humans as long as I deliver that learning inside of a story. When I do that, it goes down easy. It's just the way that our brains work.
You know what's interesting? There was a book I read a long time ago, and this isn't the title of the book. It should be the title of the book, but the reason why. And what I want to say about that one is, like, let's say, like, okay, you're a company and you're going to raise your prices. Give a reason why. Don't just raise the price, right? Or or there are studies. There was a study in a coffee shop, and people wanted to get to the front of the line, and with it, the study was like this. Test A was, hey, can I get to the front of the line?
Oh, you're right.
Hey, you know what? I'm in a hurry. I'm late for an appointment. Got it. I'm stressed out. Would it be possible to get to the front of the line? Up they go.
Yeah.
They gave a reason why. Right. And so there's that story again, right? That's whole it all kind of blends together. But I find this stuff fascinating. But let's go on to this one here. So how can a business owner get started with storytelling? How can they, I hope they all contact you. But if they don't contact, and we're going to put all your information at the very end, but if they don't contact you, what can they do? Like give like a template or something that they can kind of start with.
So the first thing is to make sure that you understand what a story is, right? So the definition that I use when working with my clients is that a story is a complete narrative about a character who meets obstacles on the way to achieving a goal. So it's complete. That is, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? The story ends. Everything that I need you to understand is contained inside that story. It's about a character. It needs to be, if you're telling a business story, tell a story about a person, right? You're not Disney, you're trying to sell something. So tell me a story about a person. Don't get fancy. You only have, if you're working with me, you only have 3 minutes anyway. So you don't have all this time to explain why it's not a person. Tell it about a person. So it's a character, but that character has some goal. The character's trying to do something, but there's things that are preventing that character from achieving their goal. Right? So now when you have all those pieces, now you're talking about a story. But every story worth telling, every story worth hearing is a story of change. What is the point where that character goes from those obstacles prevented him or her from achieving that goal to now either they transform themselves or they transform the world, and now they're able to achieve that goal? That's what everybody's listening for. They're listening for that point. When do things change? So give it to them and then highlight that transformation as well. So whenever I'm telling a story, I will make sure that it's unmissable, that moment of change. I'll say things like, and then something happened that I'll never forget. Or then I had an idea, or I realized something in that moment. and just point to it. Like, here's the thing you've been
that's
waiting on.
amazing.
Here's the thing that you want to hear about. And I tell them what that change was. And then I unwind the story at the end. So if you make sure that you have the character has a goal, there's some obstacles, there's a moment of change, you're going to be able to tell a great story just based on that. They're all around you. We tell them naturally.
Oh, yeah, every day, multiple times every day. But it's interesting too, when you talk about that, it almost makes me think of the underdog. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's everybody loves the underdog. So if you're telling the story of a client, let's say, and the client was in this position here first, which was not good.
Right.
And then through all of this, they got to this position, which was transformation, whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. Whoa, that's like the underdog is now the champion. The underdog is now the winner, which and everybody loves underdogs, right?
Yes. And because every person confronts obstacles, right? Every person has been thwarted. If they ever tried to do anything hard, it hasn't been easy, right? They've had these obstacles that have stopped them along the way. Like, nobody's story of success is, you know what, I had this idea, I tried it, it worked, and now I've got a lot of money. It just doesn't happen. But if I say, I had this idea, I tried it, it didn't work, but I made these changes, and now it worked a little bit, and then I was getting some traction, but then I met this person. And this person was able to open my mind and give me some ideas that I didn't have before. And then after that, it really took off. I was really able to start making some improvements and start making some money. Now you've got a story that people can relate to.
That is so powerful, because what it makes me think of? Like founder stories, right?
Oh, yeah.
And that would be probably at the top of the list of like, tell the story of why you did this thing, right? And when I think about it, the second, I don't know if you know this, but the second most visited page on a business website is the About page. That's statistically
I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the second one. Mm-hmm. Think about anytime you're researching anybody, 90% of the time you are going to go to that About page. Well, that About page is an opportunity for sales and marketing, but not make it sales and marketing, but it's an opportunity. You've got eyeballs.
Yes.
Well, if you've got that founder story on that page in a video format or something that's easily consumable, I mean, granted, yes, put it on the homepage. Mm-hmm. That would be ideal.
Sure.
But having it on that About page, at the top of that About page, you're going to get some eyeballs to it, because it is the second most visited page on a business website, bar none.
Yeah, I mean, now that you mentioned it, I think about my own analytics, and I do see that on some of the the websites that I work with as well. But here's something else, and it connects to the other podcast that you did on trust also. So Paul Zak has a great TED Talk on the role of oxytocin in trust. And he is, one of the things that he learned through his research was that the fastest way to build trust with someone, that is the fastest way to get your brain to secrete oxytocin, the chemical that makes you feel like I'm a trustworthy person, is by being vulnerable, is by exposing some vulnerability, right? That if I trust you with my vulnerability, if I treat you as if you are trustworthy, you get the shot of oxytocin that says, you know what, Dan's a good judge of character. He's probably the type of person I should trust. But Paul Zak then found that it works in stories as well. That they do these studies, and he had stories. One version of that people would hear would be a story version. Another would be just a fact-based version, and then you would test their blood to see if they had this increased level of oxytocin in their blood. And stories do the same thing. So when I work with clients, one of the most powerful founder stories they can tell is a founder story where they struggled, where they failed, where they repeatedly weren't able to achieve this goal until they did something. They did something. And often, if that something turns out to be the product that they're selling, now the person who's reading is sort of following along the whole way. And they're able to build trust with me before I've ever spoken to them, because it just is the way that our brains and our blood and our bodies work. And I've given them the place where they can do that. Now, if I abuse it, now I'm never going to get it back. So it's got to be authentic. It's got to be real, but it works.
Well, I tell you, I hope all of our listeners just really embrace this thought of storytelling, because it's so powerful. It truly is a marketing strategy that should be near the top, right near the top.
So I would go one step further. Beyond just marketing, it's the way to communicate with humans. It's the way to talk at a cocktail party and have people listen to you. Like, here's the thing. We always talk about how humans have a shorter and shorter attention span. But at the same time, There's people right now that are binging on Netflix. They're watching hour after hour of the same shows. So I argue that we don't necessarily have a shorter attention span, but we have a lower tolerance for crap. We have a lower tolerance for things that are not interesting and beneficial to us. And if I construct my story so that you can take a lesson from it, I can hold your attention as long as I need to be able to convey that lesson.
I would completely agree with that, because you're exactly right. People binge Netflix for show after show, 5 hours, right, on a Sunday. So, I mean, come on, 3 minutes is nothing, right? And if you make it a powerful story with all the elements you talked about, slam dunk. That's a slam dunk. So, Dan, I want to thank you so much for being on today. I do want to ask you one last question. What's a good book you've read lately? What's a good book you've read lately? And I'm throwing you a curve because you weren't ready for this.
Yeah. So obviously I have your book here as well. but yeah, so 100%, truth. If most of the storytelling books out there are crap, because they don't actually tell you how to write a story.
Ooh.
But there's one, and actually I was on his podcast just a little while ago as well. Rain Bennett wrote a book called 6 Second Stories. He's on LinkedIn. His first name is Rain, like rain falling out of a cloud. Last name is Bennett. His 6 Second Storybook, I picked it up with my skeptical look, thinking this is going to be crap too, but I couldn't find anything to disagree with it about. Like, it is really, really good. It's very concise, straight to the point. It's a great way to do that. But I would also be remiss if I didn't say on LinkedIn, 5 times a week, I'm posting content that is telling you how to build a story. I've got some good graphics there that really try to boil it down. I practice storytelling there as well. So if you don't want to read a book, follow me on LinkedIn and you'll get it all there as well.
Okay, so let's get websites. So on LinkedIn, so tell me what website for people to visit right now. What's the website?
So it's buildthestory.com.
Buildthestory.com.
Buildthestory.com. Same as on my shirt, on my sign behind there.
Branding, I love it.
100%. Yeah. And then just me, Dan Manning on LinkedIn. If you search Dan Manning storytelling, you're going to find it. It's going to be there.
No, and I will definitely vouch for your LinkedIn.
Thank you.
Every post you do is of immense value. Every single one of them. So if anybody just wants to get a taste of you, I would strongly recommend go connect with Dan. Check out Dan's post, Dan Manning on LinkedIn. Your posts are amazing. But Dan, thank you so much for your time today. I was really looking forward to this one because, as a marketer, as a content guy, I really appreciate and respect what you're doing. So I wanted to hear what you had to say, and you dropped some bombs. So I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Mike. I've really appreciated the time here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
You've just listened to the Dominate Your Market podcast with CEO, business consultant, and author, Michael Peterson. Growth-minded CEOs hire Michael to explode their revenues, build an amazing company, and create a transformational mindset that encapsulates growth, success, and ultimately happiness. His book, Dominate Your Market, is creating quite a stir in the marketplace. Go to dominateyourmarketbook.com and get your first chapter free.